Hello all, Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for some more tag time. How about another 10-minute tag? I mentioned last week that this is one of my all-time favourite stamps and suggested you could use it instead of the pre-printed tag, and it's what we're going to use for this. But first of all, I want to age the look of my tag a little bit. So this is Pumice Stone Distress Ink, little spritz of water, and all I'm going to do is lay the tag down in it, like so. Then out with the heat tool, let that dry off. If there are any places where you feel like your spots are too big or they're troubling you, just pop a little bit of water onto them. And then the other thing you can do as you go is just pick up any excess that is, again, not pleasing to your eye. It's personal taste, and it's entirely individual what you might want from this. And then what I'll also sometimes do at the end of it all is pick up some of what's left here and just give myself a couple of spatters over the top, just use up the ink as much as anything else. So that's background, aged paper, done. Again, if your tag is curling up and causing trouble, generally a little dry on the back will cause those fibres to recurl in the other direction and get you back to somewhere near flat. So out with this fabulous vintage Christmas exhibition advert. I'm just going to pop that onto there. And I want tone on tone because this is background, so I'm using the Pebble Beach just to give myself that amazing vintage advert, but with subtlety. And if you like even more subtlety, you can sort of not ink it up fully, and then you'll get a faded version. So if I'm vaguely thinking about making a tag pair, then I don't want to position this in exactly the same place. I didn't have the whole word Christmas on before, or the whole word exhibition. So I think what I might do is position it slightly in this direction this time, so that I've at least got the whole word Christmas on there. I mean, it's just gorgeous, isn't it? So let's zoom in a little bit for the next part of the stamping. As you'll know, I'm not generally much of a one for red, but at Christmas there are berries. So these are my hawthorn berries from the Eclectic Alice and Bomber Fodder Berry edition, a set which was designed especially for the class that I taught in Fodder School 3. And but it is completely available for you to use, and it's got a bunch of different berries, of course, little bits of ephemera, wordiness, and I do have a whole hawthorn set, but this is an extra hawthorn sprig. Let's pop that going across there. I'm stamping in, I think it's Coffee Archival. I did have some embossing powder on standby for the previous one in case that wasn't strong enough for me, but I think, again, I'm pretty happy with the look of that sprig. So in terms of painting this, you can use distress inks, you could use watercolours, you can use distress oxides, you can use paint, you can use whatever you like. I'm actually using a mixture, so this is mixed media. This is Crackling Campfire Distress Ink, which, as you may or may not know, is a fiery delight. I've got my much loved Daniel Smith's on the table. This is Anthraquinoid Red, which is a beautiful, deep, cool red, and between them, these two really make me happy. So I'm just going to do some fairly loose. I don't particularly want to be precise about this at all. I'm just going to get some paint on, and then I'm going to get some distress ink on, and the two will mix. If it goes over the line a bit in a way that doesn't make you happy, deal with it. Get a finger in there, get a cloth in there. You might be able to lift it with a bit of water, like you can lift watercolour. If you want a bit more flow, just a spritz of water sort of next to the pad of colour enables me to draw in extra water if I want it. And then I've got that lovely loose fluid look going on. And as I've mentioned before, nature doesn't deal in sort of flat colour. There's always colour variation going on. So some berries are quite orange, some berries are much redder, whether they're caught the light or they're ripening at a different rate, or they're stuck in the shadow behind another berry. So that just gets that done. Again, for the stem, you could absolutely use something like walnut stain or ground espresso distress inks, or scorched timber, deep dark. Since I've got the watercolours right here, I'm going to use sepia, which is down here, which is just a deep dark brown. And this stem is so fine in places, so I'm both using a very fine watercolour brush, but you could use a water brush. You can use whatever you've got, but it's a really light touch so that you've really got just the very tip of the brush in action to get that very fine line. Again, if you're using watercolour pencils, sharpen it to a nice fine point. If you're using a marker pen, you'll want the fine end if you've got those sort of paint tip one. Well, now you might be able to make it work, I guess, with the paintbrush type of nib. Again, if you're very, very light-handed with it and keep it right on the very tip. So I'm also going to add maybe just a touch of the darks around these berry details at the heads of the berries, just for fun. But it's just that really. Needn't take you more than a couple of minutes. What you do want to do is make sure you mop up your crackling campfire, because it stains. If you get it on your fingers, you will be fiery for a while. So as that's drying, I'm just going to get myself my next batch of colours, which are going to be the greens. I think I want the peeled paint. I think I used Distress Oxide Rustic Wilderness. That might have been about it, actually. And I've got a couple of the same sets that we used last week. So Forest Floor, I think that is, and Winter Watercolour 2. And I'm just going to add some greenery. So done with you for now. I rather like peeled paint on this one. This one's got a little pine cone on the bottom, and I'm not particularly interested in having the pine cone for these purposes. So I'm going to knock him away. I want to sort of stamp around this. If I see that there's a position I want to stamp it where I'm going to hit my berries, I sort of want to put the greenery behind the berries, so just a little scrap of paper even over the top of that berry will give me enough of an illusion of that greenery going behind instead of on top of. Did I inked that up with something else that time? Clearly. How did I manage that? You'll have seen, you were probably shouting at the camera. So I can spritz that for a slightly lighter look, and maybe put some peeled paint in there as well. That I will wipe off, because having wetted the Oxide and then put the other one straight over the top, but it's all good. We want variation. So you can spritz with a bit of water for a softer stamping, and that's going to get you a nice variation. Let's use, oh well, there's a holly branch on this one as well, isn't there? Let's have a bit of holly. Why not? Don't think I used holly on the last one. What colour do we want that in? There's all kinds of greens. Maybe I'll go with just a little bit of the trusty olive. I just want the leaf sort of tipped in at the edge. I'm not bothered about the berries because I've got berries, but I'm just thinking it might be quite nice to have a bit of solid leafiness in and around. So I'm just going to tip that in at the edges. That's quite a nice effect. A couple of little ones down there. Yeah, happy with that. Good. Unexpected addition to my 10 minutes. And I do like this one from Forest Floor. Big favourite of mine. And again, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a gentle sweep of the Rustic Wilderness and then add a bit of peeled paint to that. Again, if you're worried about contamination, just a quick swipe with the kitchen towel to clean that off. And I'm going to have that come up the side here, and maybe a little bit coming in from here. That's quite nice. I could have another of those. Let's go peeled paint. Just coming up from there. So again, I can see that's in danger of hitting this berry. So I'm just going to stick that little scrap of paper in the way so that as that comes up, it gives me the illusion of that branch coming in from behind. That's all rather nice. Let's do one rustic wilderness just tipping in from here, maybe quite soft, so a good spritz of water, maybe even knock it back a little bit so that it's nice and juicy. Yeah, that's lovely, except for missing out the bit there, so I'm going to fill in with the bit where I can see there's ink on the stamp. Nice. Look, I mean, look how simple. Grand. So the other thing I thought would be nice on this, red and green, very traditional Christmas kinds of colours. I've got all these snowflake die cuts sitting around, also waiting to be used along with my greenery. I tried some greenery, didn't think I wanted it. So I think it's quite nice having a bit of snowflake here and a bit of snowflake tipping in from up here. Are they better the other way around? No, because I like it going like that. Good. So a little bit of vintage snow for our exhibition. So I'm going to stick that on. And again, I'm not terribly bothered about getting it flat to the paper in every direction. Let's just give it a little bit of freedom. It just gives us a lovely highlight. And speaking of highlights, I think my berries are probably about dry by now. I'm going to just turn that over so I can see where it's sticking out over the edge and trim so that it fits up the side there. You might be thinking this is cheating because, I know what I'm doing, so of course it only takes 10 minutes. But I promise you, this only took maybe 12 or 13 minutes with a little bit of thinking time, because I just didn't let myself stop and think. I just went for it. So speaking of highlights, as I said, this red should now be dry enough that I can just put a little dot of highlight onto each of these berries, and that's going to give me that illusion of light falling on them and how glossy they are. Just that delicious. It's a double whammy because it gives you that glossiness, but it also gives you an additional sort of hint of dimension, I think. So it's a really worthwhile extra 27 seconds to get those little dots on. You need another. There we go. Nice. And then in thinking about words, I contemplated word stickers, but I've got the last remnants of the seasonal word bands, which I love. But there are a couple of phrases that are not really terribly me. So I think, well, see, that was in the back of my brain because I rejected Have a Holly Jolly Christmas when I did the Jingle Bells one. And I've now got Holly Jolly Christmas, and I think that's probably what my brain was doing when it decided on the holly. In order to highlight those words, we have done it with a distress crayon in the past, but you can also, as I know that I have said at various points, you can also do it with paint. So I'm just going to show you how I do that. A fingertip into the paint, down into the lettering. Just make sure you've got all the lettering, and I'm kind of going up and down so that it's really landing into those debossed letters. Then piece of kitchen towel or a cloth and just wipe straight across the surface. You might have to go back and forth a couple of times, but as long as you're wiping flat, you'll just be wiping paint away from the surface and not wiping paint away from the lettering, which means you've got that lovely depth going in. I'm going to give this a quick little inking just to draw the eye in a little bit. Maybe I'll use a bit of that coffee since it's here to add a bit of depth to the edges of the tag. I'm mostly going to avoid the snowflakes because I don't want brown snowflakes. That's not right. This one could do with a bit more, actually, thinking about it. So now I'm doing 2 tags in 10 minutes. That's that. And of course I've got some white left on the mat. I'm not going to do that, am I? Let's just give that a quick snowy flick. Mostly not hitting the berries because I don't want to distract from my lovely light bubbles. Well, that's pretty good. Might need to give that a quick little blast with the heat gun so that I don't smudge the white as I go on to the final step. There it is. If you've got one that's bothering you, again, get in there while it's still wet and you can knock it back just a little bit. And if they're sticking up and there's just too much paint and they're not drying, just dab them flat with that little bit of help. Again, go on the back, get those paper fibres to just stretch in both directions and you'll flatten out. And so my thought with this was, I want to pretend I've tied it on. So having put some twine through the top, let's do that. You wait a second. Through from the back, through the middle and done. Give it a tug. What I tend to do is just take the bit of twine. So instead of faffing with trying to actually string it on with the twine, I'm going to put a little edge of twine through this end. I'm going to put a slightly longer, hopefully long enough, edge of twine through this end. Then I'm going to take my glue this metal to the tag where I want it, kind of there. And while I'm messing around, I'm going to help that stay put with just a clothes peg. One of the most vital tools in the craft room. Then flip it over. Little bit of tape. So this is just masking tape. You can use sellotape, any kind of tape you've got around really. And you want these ends of twine bent over, catch on the other side and tape them down. What you might want to do is then mount this tag maybe on a white backing, or you might be using just a card panel ready to mount onto a card, in which case these bits of ends of twine are just going to vanish in any case, stuck down behind the card. You might have a little bit of bumpiness, but that's the joy of handmade stuff. And then, yeah, just tease them apart a little bit so you've got that lovely illusion of the twine holding on. There we go. I don't know, I haven't had a timer going, but I'm pretty certain that the actual making time for that was under 10 minutes or around the 10-minute mark. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I'll dive in for a close-up of these so that you can take a look at some of the detail in those layers. If you've enjoyed that, do give me a thumbs up. If you're not already subscribed, look at that. Always the sign of a good time. It's been quite a day. Subscribe, and I would love to have your company on this creative journey. I'll put as much detail down below of what I've used today as I can remember. And happy crafting all.